All right.
We love it. We love it. Well, welcome to Conscious Lifestyles. We're here today with an amazing presenter, best-selling author, world-renowned pioneer in bridging the gap between science and spirituality. And in seeing some of the things that you've done, my first introduction to you was back in the days of sacred geometry.
Well, that was a long time ago.
I know, and you've come
The
up
old
doing
days.
so many things since then, and I've just seen that your background is so much in the science realm that I'm curious as to how you went from geologist, defense, in the defense area to internet, into spirituality.
You know, and people ask me that question a lot. They ask it in different ways, but they often will ask how I made what many people perceive to be a quantum leap from science and technology into spirituality and our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. And I think for me, the first time I heard the question, I was surprised because I never saw it as a great leap. For me, it was more of a logical next step. I was born and raised in a relatively conservative community in the Midwest. And although we didn't talk about it a lot, I never made a distinction between science and spirituality. I thought they were one and the same. So when I studied science, chemistry, geology, biology, physics, that was the name that we gave it in school, but ultimately I always believed that I was exploring the inner workings of the universe and a higher power. And it wasn't until I got into corporations around the coffee machines and water fountains in the morning that I discovered nothing could be further from the truth. That the belief was that the two are mutually exclusive. You have to either follow the path of science and technology or spirituality and religious traditions, but not combine them. And to answer your question specifically, it was during the last years of the Cold War, one of the most frightening times in the history of our planet for people working behind the scenes. Who saw how close we came to doing the unthinkable and losing everything that we cherished during those years. My question to myself was this: what would happen if we married the two great ways of knowing, the science that tells us how things work, the nuts and the bolts, with the spiritual traditions that tell us how to apply those things in our lives? Well, if we marry those two things together into a wisdom combined that's greater than either could be individually, where would that lead us, and would it help us to transcend the differences that led to the great wars in the past, including the Cold War? And my answer to that question is what brings me here today and the last 30 years of my life, is exploring the wisdom of our past. What have we known in the past that we have forgotten in the present? And by bringing that wisdom forward with the best science of today, how can we apply those understandings to transcending the challenges of the uncharted territory where we find ourselves today, according to the best minds of our time? So that's a long answer to a short question, but I wanted to lay that out so we can tie back into it as we go through our conversation.
Right, well, thank you. Yeah, and I noticed that you talk about this being a critical period, a critical point.
Absolutely.
And taking that wisdom of the past and bringing it into the future as our key. How has that changed for you over the last few years from back? You had so many wonderful books, and how has that evolved? How has that been evolved?
In 1988, I wrote my first book. It was called Awakening to Zero Point. And did you read that book?
I read. It was a way long time ago.
I put her on the spot.
Yeah, I had definitely. I saw the video.
My mom was the first to read that book.
Yes.
And the purpose of that book, what I found, Shima, was that there was an entire group of people of many different ages, both male and female, who were interested in the changes in the planet, but they felt excluded from the conversation because they didn't relate to spirituality. They didn't relate to chakras and angels and higher realms of interdimensional experience. That wasn't their language. So it's not that they didn't care or weren't interested, they just didn't relate to the language. And Awakening to Zero Point began as a little workbook for scientists and engineers, bridging the language of our most cherished spiritual tradition, not the religion, but the spiritual seed of many of the religious traditions, with the best science of today. And once those people really could see that we were using two different languages to address the same challenges, they were way on board with the conversation. And it was that book that began the series that have led to the point where we are. I am with my work right now. I had to make a choice during that time. Did I want to write one book this thick of all of the insights that I had gleaned from studying those indigenous and ancient traditions, or did I want to break it into logical segments and explore each one individually, applying it to what we were seeing in our world at the time the book was written, and I chose to do the latter. So from the book Awakening to Zero Point and Walking Between the Worlds was the second book, the Isaiah Effect, the God Code, the Divine Matrix. Each of those, although they are very different from one another, they all speak to our relationship to one another, our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to this world, and ultimately to a greater force, however we choose to perceive that force. And ways to bring those understandings to bear upon the challenges. And the experts, the best minds of our time are telling us right now that we're living a time unlike any in 5,000 years of recorded human history, where never have so many people been faced with the number and the magnitude of challenges, with each specific challenge holding the power to forever end all that we cherish. They're telling us we've got 5 to 8 years. We've got to figure them all out within 5 to 8 years. We've never had to do anything like that before. So my question is why? And why are all these things happening right now? Why didn't they happen 50 years ago or 200 years ago? What's so different about our time in history, and what does it mean to us today? And that is the question that all of this work is leading to, and for me, to the best of my ability, answering those questions. So
have you seen that the culture, that people are, the understanding of people of your work, that there's an opening to it, and their ability to understand it is also evolving?
I think what we're seeing is that it's the same conversation that was happening 30 years ago. More people know about it now, and I believe there's a greater acceptance because people are seeing in the world around them the changes that cannot be explained by conventional explanations. So they're looking beyond conventional explanation, being why is the climate changing as fast as it is? Why is there a food shortage? Why are the sea levels rising? Why are we having the greatest number of wars and the greatest threats of global warming? Why are all these things happening right now? 30 new diseases in 25 years we have no medical cure for. Forest fires raging out of control on multiple continents, disease killing millions of people with no medical cure. Why are all these things happening right now? And I think as people see that their world is changing quicker than we can document in our texts or teach it in our classrooms, they are open to new ideas. And the new ideas are actually very old ideas that reconnect us as part of, rather than separate from, our world. And seeing ourselves as integral elements rather than passive bystanders to the things that are happening, which means that we have the ability to participate and change what's happening in our world. And that's the core of our most cherished and ancient traditions, is that we are at a moment of choice. We've got to make choices right now about how we go forward from this moment in history, this pivotal moment in history. That's a long answer to a short question.
No, it's great, it's great. So we are the people we've been waiting for.
We can see precisely.
Right, we're the ones that, well, it's exciting because, you know, I always felt that we came here, I always knew we were here for a particular purpose, and it's like, well, when are we going to get on with it? And it certainly seems like we're getting on with it.
Well, you know, it is, and it's interesting to me because it's not uncommon in the people we talk to throughout the world. I asked for a show of hands in the audience, how many people feel like you've been training, preparing for something all of your lives? Or how many people never felt like they really fit in to the world that they were presented? They did the best they could, but they didn't really fit in. They were preparing, you know, for something else. What's so interesting for me is there must be a single generation, one generation, that has mastered all that has been up until this moment in time. We've learned to live in one world, and within a single generation, while we're still living in that world, the conditions of the planet change so quickly that we must develop another way of being and live in that world as well. But one generation must straddle both. And it takes a really, really strong being who knows themselves to the core of their essence, to not get lost in that change. And I think this is the generation now that's understanding what that means. And no generation in 5,125 years of recorded human history has experienced what we're experiencing right now. And for us to make the choices that guide us from this point forward, how can we possibly make those choices if we don't know who we are? And how can we possibly know who we are until we understand, or without understanding, our relationship to the world and the forces of nature in ways that our own science is now bearing out. So this is what's so fascinating to me, and I think why there's a growing acceptance for a body of work that is based in science, although it's not highly technical. But there's scientific reasons helping us to understand why things are the way they are. And when we see those principles, we say, well, isn't that just like the spiritual principles that we see in the Buddhist monasteries in Tibet, or in the indigenous tribes of the Andes Mountains of Bolivia or Peru, or in the American desert Southwest? And the answer is yes. Very, very similar to those principles.
So when we talk about the Mayan, we talk about the Mayan 2012 and Mayan calendar and all this, we're really not just talking about the Mayan, we're talking about the indigenous people, the wisdom.
Well, this is absolutely, this is where it gets really interesting, because almost universally, our indigenous ancestors, they're all pointing to this time in history, and they said something extraordinary will happen to you and your world in this little window of time. Many of those traditions are earth-based traditions, so they look for earth signs to tell them when that is. A white buffalo born in the plains of North America, or when the crops no longer grow in their seasons. Very generalized kinds of signs, and to a scientist, that makes them crazy. A scientist can't do anything with the birth of a white buffalo, or the crops not growing in their seasons. The Mayans looked at these cycles as well, but what makes them different is they actually linked the beginning and the end of their cycles to astronomical events that we now can verify and calculate and predict mathematically. And they're the only tradition that I'm aware of in what were called the Mesoamerican traditions that were able to do this. So that's why I believe we're so drawn to the Mayans, because of their specificity about the beginning of the cycle. It's a fact that we are living the close of a 5,125-year cycle. Began 3114 BC. It ends in December 21st, 2012 AD. That's a fact. It's a fact there have been at least 4 of these cycles in the past. And it is a fact that each time those cycles came to an end, and as the next one began, there were cataclysmic conditions in the world that forever changed the way people live their lives, not unlike what we are experiencing right now. Changes in climate, changes in weather, changes in sea level, the power of the sun, the magnetism of the earth. All of these are converging in this window of time, and what it means to us is all of a sudden we're not growing wheat in Kansas in August anymore, and we're wondering why. Because to us, the idea of a cyclic universe is a foreign concept, but to much of the indigenous world, it's where their beliefs begin. They begin with the understanding that we are cyclic beings, cyclic lives, that we live in a cyclic universe, and that the conditions that have happened in the past will repeat again in the present and the future, predictable rhythms. And so they have been doing their very best to prepare us for 5,125 years of what we could expect, and also sharing with us how we could live our lives to transcend the challenges of those times. Other than that,
so
there's not much going on.
So there's a lot. So we could talk all day. You have so much wonderful.
You should come to a program that we're going to do at the Conscious Life Expo.
I think that's a great idea. I think I'll do that. And just in final closing, okay, so here we are. Here's the average person. What can they do? Like, is there like a ABC that people can do to get ready for this?
It's already happening. There's nothing to get ready for.
We're doing it.
And I think one of the really important things to recognize is that the close of these cycles, it's not a moment in time, it's a window, a zone. And the mathematicians tell us that our zone, our 2012 window, began right around 1980. It ends around 2016. That means we're already halfway through and well into whatever the changes are that so many are anticipating and expecting. They're already happening. And I think we're doing really well. And there are a lot of good things happening as well. But the key, and where this all comes together, is that our own science now is telling us that from the perspective of the fields that link all life, like the magnetic fields of our planet. There is no them and us, there's a we. And as we focus in our hearts, don't need any scientific knowledge to do this, but as we focus not in our minds but in our hearts, heart-centered ways of living, what we're actually doing is triggering the most powerful magnetic field in the human body that links with the magnetic field of the earth and eases the changes that the planet is going through. And this is our own science now that's telling us this. So for many people, they don't relate well to the science, but the fact that our most cherished spiritual indigenous traditions are now telling us that by moving into our heart, we may transcend many of the challenges of our lives. That resonates with a lot of people because it's the essence of who we are.
So that's the difference between the fear aspect and the love aspect, and tuning into that, just kind of into the heart, into connecting.
It is. There's a growing body of scientific evidence strongly suggesting that the images that we surround ourselves with in the world become the reality of life very, very quickly. And as we surround ourselves through the media, frightening images of 2012 and destruction and collapse and the documentaries and the Hollywood movies and everything like that, we have to ask ourselves, what is the effect of reinforcing those kinds of images again and again and again? What do we do to give ourselves alternative alternative images of a very powerful future? And I think that's the value of Conscious Life Expo and these kinds of gatherings, because it gives us an opportunity to come together and do precisely that. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to do that here this evening.
Well, thank you, Greg.
Yeah,
it's so
you.
wonderful to have you. And
I'm absolutely
thank you for joining us.
One thing, do you have any